Hey everyone, how are you guys doing today? I hope you guys are well. I'm doing all right myself. And it looks like we have some people in the chat. Let me go ahead and hopefully, there we are. Getting YouTube all set up on another tab. All right. Looks like Netter is first, right? But no, actually, yes. Okay, we have more people. That's great. That is great. Oh yeah, that was a couple hours ago. I did want to point out that Melissa wanted to mention to Big Al if you are if you're doing well, she wanted to know, and that you and your mother are in her prayers and also in her son Jake's prayers. So hopefully she can join us, but I think she had some phone battery trouble a couple hours ago. All right. Hello, Dr. Y. Hello, Big Al. Thank you. Thank you. I hope so. Daniel Craig, Solar Fields, Night Traffic City. I am down. I don't have all his tracks memorized. I don't really think about track titles, even though I'm very particular about my own track titles. One, though, I do remember is Union Light. I love that one. I think that was one of the first of his I had heard before I really knew who he was. And Daniel Heron is in. And Dr. Y says, I'm going to be listening while drawing again, so I might be a bit silent. Oh, that's all right. That's all right. And Steve Cruz. Yes, good. Welcome. It's good to see you. I think the question, Aged Boomer, is, did I eat anything with onions more than once today? And the answer would be no. But yeah, I mean, I have my onions. I've been going between the bulk white onion and the red onion. It just depends on what looks good and best. It's kind of funny. Every time I go to the store where the onions are not good, like when they're pretty sorry looking and they've got flies on them and stuff like that, I'm like, darn it. You know how I translated that in my head? I thought you said Kix Pebbles, the character. I was like, I don't think that sounds like you at all. Onions make you mighty. I wouldn't doubt that. It's like Popeye with spinach. I had spinach, I had onions, I had broccoli, I had tomato, garlic, all that good stuff. And it looks like Troy doesn't want to say hi to me. Just wants to talk to the professor, I guess. Well, here's the thing, Daniel. Someone, I'm not going to mention any names, but someone on this chat has an antipathy, a gross antipathy toward onions. And I'm trying to back off because we all have our antipathies. I don't care for cooked mushrooms, for instance. I can eat raw mushrooms. I'm fine with raw mushrooms. Mushrooms in a salad, maybe portobello mushrooms, for something like shish kebab or something like that. But I'm not into the cooked onions. This is not, no, no, not at all. See, nothing gets transmitted through the microphone. And let's see. Yes, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, Troy. This is my channel. All right, so I think I've welcomed everyone. Hopefully some more people are coming. So we'll get into some more 20th century Western music. I had hoped that this was going to be a rather condensed version. I thought it was going to be shorter than the previous week. But when I was doing my notes, it kind of blew up. And I have some notes. And as many notes as I have, they are, this whole thing is an overview. I'm barely scratching the surface. The more I was looking into it, the more I started remembering all these different genres and styles and approaches, these composition approaches that branched out from these major movements. But I will talk about the major things. And actually, if not, major in compared to, compared to other things happening in the 20th century, at least the major things that I was taught in school and I was taught to utilize in terms of approaches in my composition and my performance. So how's my mic? Does it sound good? I didn't check any of my connection and input before coming on. I would like to, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly. If it sounds like I have kind of a wet blanket over me, let me know because I want to sound nice and clear. I'll check my sound system preferences real quick. Make sure everything is good. Okay, looks like I'm good. All right. Oh man, you guys are talking about food. First of all, I just had dinner, so I'm not inclined to talk about food right now. But maybe we'll get back to it. Let's talk about music because I really want to just steamroll right on into my notes. Depending on the length of this lecture, I might take a break in the middle, refer to chat if you had questions, or maybe just go as going right through there. Okay, thank you. I like that. I like the microphone. It's not quite that microphone, but it's there you go. There you go. Good. Okay, let's get started. We're going to talk about some major movements, a couple major artistic movements, and a few approaches, composition and performance approaches of the 20th century Western music of Europe, and of course our American composers. I'll name a few there, and we'll get started. Not so much deconstruction this time around. I'll find a few things, but this is going to be essentially a historical overview. So there you go. Very funny, aged boomer. All right. So part 2 of the history of 20th century Western music, what's also known as post-war music or post-war modern music. So as we had established last week, we had a shift, a breaking away of traditional tonality and harmony and traditional romantic and classical writing and methods with our second Viennese school, things like 12-tone serialism or tonal serialism later in the 1950s. Again, our major figures there were Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. But they adhered to classical form while approaching a tonality. Now, with total serialism, all musical parameters had been serialized, had been put into this organizational pattern of cells. And this was introduced and really, I would say, pretty much firmly established by the French composer Pierre Boulez. And structure in this way was predetermined. So there was a rather limiting, rather totalitarian method of composing music when everything else in the music in your composition was predetermined before you set the pencil to the staff paper. And this was the major break away from the classical and romantic structures. So this is kind of getting into the 1950s. But other things were happening there too, both in Europe and also in the United States. One of the major events, one of the events that student composers really pick up on is aleatoric or chance music. So aleatoric, the name actually comes from the Latin word alea, which is dice. And these aleatoric music is built, it's composed based on things left to chance or things being decided by the performers themselves, whether at the time of the performance or established beforehand. So musical parameters or events are left to chance, And composition, it can be completed, it can be designed, but it's more or less fragmented, it may be chopped up, so to speak. And the musical events inside that whole composition or parts of the composition are left to chance, maybe even left out completely. The most prominent figure to enter the scene is the American composer John Cage. And one of the more seminal pieces of aleatoric music is his piece, Music of Changes, which was composed in 1951. And this was based on the I Ching method, a Chinese number method. And here, the musical parameters are controlled are the note duration or note length, the tempo, and the dynamics. We also have other figures in actually earlier figures, the American composers Charles Ives and Henry Cowell, but Cage definitely into the 50s he took it to a whole new level. Now abroad we have Karl-Heinz Stockhausen with his Klavierstück 11 piece, where there are 19 events to be performed in a sequence determined by the performer. And so this is, I would say, diametrically in opposition to total serialism, where you are leaving things not only to chance established by the composer, but also you're leaving some control to the performer. And so the composer in this case has little control, or maybe a degree of control, but not total control. We're also getting into this idea of indeterminate music, and I've confused the two, chance music and indeterminate music, but it is an offshoot. Indeterminate music is an offshoot of aleatoric music. So there are three methods to this kind of music. The first is the determinate or the fixed score, so something that is composed ahead of time by the composer. So music is already previously set, and there's that, but there is a sequence of events that is determined by more mathematical theories. So material is fixed, but it's produced, the outcome is produced by random procedures. The second method is the control of the performer. So musical events may had been decided beforehand, but it's left to the performer, not to the composer. And the third established method is the indeterminate notation, where traditional music notation is replaced by visual images, words or instructions or signs for the performer to interpret. This also gets into a little bit later stochastic music. I would say the Greek composer Xenakis is pretty much the front runner of this, where things are composed and generated mathematically, statistically, or mechanically. So you can think of things like the Markov chain, game theory, set theory, Brownian motion, and all of those things that are whether computer generated or generated by a manual set of procedures, but they are more or less mathematical. So things aren't so much wholly designed, or I would even venture to say humanly designed. Things are left to chance, or they are generated by these mathematical theories or number systems. Now, a couple movements really took on into the 60s and into the early 70s, so late 1950s into the early 70s. The first movement is the happening movement, and this was first established by the painter Alan Capro, or Capra. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce his name. In fact, I think he's a multidisciplinary artist. I'll just go ahead and put his name down there for your reference. So this idea, the happening movement, was first established and really pushed by this artist, Alan Capro. So he's an American painter who established concepts like performance art or multidisciplinary art, and he hosted these events, huge scene in New York at the time. I did not know this, or maybe I knew this but forgot, but he was a student of John Cage, who at the time was doing musical happenings as early as 1952. And Capro explored negative space in visual arts as John Cage explored silence. And this kind of scene was to be compared with this impermanent art of the dotted period. That the happening, really, as the name implies, was now. Each performance, even if structurally programmed, resulted in a different outcome or had a different result because it depended on the audience participating. Each performance had this organic dependence to its environment. So a piece could have a completely dynamically different outcome if there were 18 people versus 58 people and all of that. Now, there is a philosophy behind this happening. The first is there is no failure. The artist or the audience isn't restricted to things like etiquette or convention or technique or form. There was also this encouragement of living life through this art through real time with all its flaws and all its mistakes. Now, in my experience as a performer and as a composer and as a composition student, doing this in the academia, also doing this in venues outside the university, but that had this kind of philosophy that was akin to the academics. I have found that if a piece is set up this way or a concert is set up this way, where it's between the performer and audience member, especially the audience involvement and participation in this event, I do, only from my experience, if you set it up this way, you kind of get mediocre results, mediocre performances. There was no longer this divide or this hierarchy between the performer who had a standard of achievement and the audience member who was only listening. Now the audience member was just as much involved as the performer or as the composer. So there's really no set of skills or experience in something like this. It depends on the design of the composition and what the performer is doing. But I noticed that performers, even app performers and professional performers, there's a tendency to get a little lazy with this format. So in my experience, only in mine, I can't speak for anyone else, mediocrity is at play, whether that is with improvisation or an interpretation of a score. And I'm going to get into this idea a little bit later. Maybe it's going to be its own live stream. I don't know how I'm going to format this, but I'm going to talk about extended technique versus traditional technique. And a lot of these performances, whether it's the happening or some other approaches that I will get into later, a lot of people do extended technique on their instruments. And I will say, as a violinist, extended technique, and I should do a demonstration, not today, because StreamYard would cancel out all my sounds. But extended technique is really just doing a lot of different things just on the body of the instrument and generating a lot of different sounds and fluctuations and all that good stuff. And it's great stuff. But I think people think, at least for violin, I think people think, oh, that it's extended technique. It's new. It was introduced in the 20th century, more or less. Therefore, it's more difficult. And I want to say, no matter what people tell you, at least as a violinist, as far as I'm concerned, extended technique is nothing to traditional technique. Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, Brahms, all those people will always demand more of me as a violinist than a contemporary composer producing a solo violin piece, for instance. That's a side note. So anyway, all this to say is that there's no longer a line between the composer or performer or the performer and the audience member. It's kind of a more or less all immersive experience. With this also, this philosophy behind the happening, there's this heightened expectation of the unpredictable because there's really no fixed direction. Now, for me, again, side note, unless there's some fixed direction in the musical narrative and you're not intentional as a performer with every second, you do tend to get lazy as a composer and performer. Again, that's just my experience. Um, so, you know, unpredictability. Well, things like words that have an inherent meaning uh, might not make literal sense in the context of this kind of music or this kind of multidisciplinary art form. Words may even be reduced to just syllables. And so the sounds of the words oftentimes replace the actual meaning of the word. There's a Dutch avant-garde composer by the name of Jacques Blanc, who is still involved, I think, in sound poetry. And the idea of sound poetry and using phonemes and consonances and actually the sound structure of the actual word was very, very important. He was inspired by Kurt Schwitters, he's a famous German multimedia artist, and Erzene. In fact, I will put Jacques Blanc on. That is the Dutch sound poet. I should say sound poet. Sound poetry. He's pretty zany, and I was so awestruck as a kid, or not a kid, sorry, as a student. I thought like a kid as an undergrad, and I don't know what possessed me to buy his book on sound poetry. It cost $60. I did not have as a graduate student. But I did buy his book. I don't know where it is now, but it wasn't worth $60. But he was kind, but he very, very zany. His major influence was Kurt Schwitters. And I should find this video for you guys if I can find it. Erzenate, he started composing this sound poetry by, I think it started was 1922, but he finished it. I think it was the first performance of it, 1932. And Erzenate, it's a very interesting piece. And I think there's a Swiss performer out there on YouTube. I saw the video yesterday, so the video is still up. I saw it as a graduate student too. Pretty interesting piece. A lot of phonetics and nonsensical words, but this Swiss performer actually is really good. He's a very good performer. He condensed it to about 16 minutes. I think the original piece is about 43 minutes of just nonsensical phonemes and words and all of that good stuff. So that a couple names for you there. Now, if any of these notes sound a little jumbled and you need clarification for things like the happening movement, just let me know. So just to establish the philosophy again, we have mediocrity. It's at play, whether it's improvisation or interpretation of the score. Well, they didn't think it's mediocre. I do. The philosophy is that there is no failure. So mistakes are great. Mistakes are fine. So there's this no need to have the standard of excellence as a performer. You're living your art like you're living your life in real time, and mistakes are fine. Human flaw is fine. We don't need. They consider like the standard of excellence as highbrow art. I'm just like, are you serious? Now, I'm not saying there weren't competent, good, prestigious composers and artists behind this movement. It's just there is a tendency of getting a little slack with performance with this kind of philosophy. So also the heightened expectation of the unpredictable. See, it was all about, guys, even in the 1960s in the New York scene, it was all about subverting expectations. But the problem is, with my experience as a composer and a performer and someone who just went to all these different events, is when you make something too unpredictable, it starts becoming predictable. Maybe that's a subjective opinion. Now, another thing that they treasured with this happening is that because the outcome of the performance had to do with the audience participation and involvement, the performances were always fresh because no performance could be reproduced. And I'd like to add that no performance can also be remembered. the thing is, I don't really remember a lot of these kinds of performances because they believe in so much in spontaneity, and that only you at this moment, today, tonight, have only you have this experience. No one else has. And I actually do believe in preserving the music, in preserving the art form in whatever way you can. I firmly believe that many symphony pieces are still being played, are still being listened to because of its accessibility with the media, like a CD recording or a recording on YouTube. This kind of thing is really important. So the happening actually didn't go much further down history or further into the future as the 1970s. Although I have been in a happening movement, and if you guys want to know more about that, that's another story. So anyway, performances had to be fresh and they could not be reproduced. I think there was also an abolition of traditional narrative and a total embrace of free form. And I'm not against free form. I like freestyle improvisation. I think some of my best violin playing, if I'm very intentional as a performer, has come from freestyle, free form improvisation. But I'm very intentional with every moment, and that's pretty important. Now, another thing about the philosophy behind the happening movement, really behind Alan Capro, the painter, is that he was trying to push for this idea that this was an important moment in society, an important moment in art history. And I'm actually going to read, I can't remember where I got this quote, to be honest. I'll have to find it sometime, maybe put it in the comments below another time. But I'm going to read you this paragraph on what this was about. Capro explains that happenings, the musical or the artistic happening, he explains that happenings are not a new style, but a moral act, a human stand of great urgency, whose professional status as art is less critical than their certainty as an ultimate existential commitment. He argues that once artists have been recognized and paid, they also surrender to the confinement rather to the tastes of patrons, even if that's not the intention of the artist or the patron. The whole situation, he says, is corrosive. Neither patrons nor artists comprehend their role, and out of this hidden discomfort comes a stillborn art, tight and merely repetitive, and at worst, chic. Though we may easily blame those, let me see if I can say this clearly. I practiced this. I didn't. Though we may easily blame those offering the temptation, Capro reminds us that it's not about the publicist's moral obligation to protect the artist's freedom. And artists themselves hold the ultimate power to reject fame if they do not want its responsibility. So essentially, that it's like if you're being paid for your art, you have a moral obligation to do something greater than that. And it's kind of they're seeing that making money off your art is a bad thing. That if you do make money off of your art, you're actually confining yourself. As an artist, you're confining to tastes of the public square, of the public conscience. And I should have practiced this paragraph because I thought it was a lot more insightful when I was reading it more dramatically. So it's behind this happening is this push for artists to have this moral obligation, like disregard the patron, disregard what the world is thinking art should be. You have a moral obligation to push art in this new narrative. So hopefully that made sense. All right, so let's talk about one more movement before we take a break, and then I'll read chat and we'll come back to some other approaches. Another artistic movement that was happening, which wasn't the happening, it was more international in the 1960s and 70s, and that is the Fluxus movement. And with Fluxus, there was an emphasis on the process rather than the final result. In music, performances were a demonstration of performance art. And a common view was that there was no line between performer, composer, and audience. This also happening a little bit, but it really started cementing in Fluxus. The audience members became the performers simply by interacting. And in my own experience, people really didn't care for that line. They did not like the hierarchy between the audience member and the performer. Not sure why. I do not mind being an audience member, and I do not mind being wowed by a performer. I'm a performer myself, but I don't need to be the performer all the time. Anyway, that's besides the point. John Cage, the American composer, was a major figure in this movement. All art disciplines were involved. New art forms introduced here were something like concrete poetry, in which the topography was more important than the actual verbal utterance of the words. Noise music, or noise set within the musical narrative. And these origins drew from this kind of anti-art sentiment of Dadaism, a rejection of what was traditionally considered art. They wanted to broaden the definition of art and expand what art was. The founder for the Fluxus movement, or at least one of the founders, George McCunas, expressed that this was the movement. And this may sound familiar to you guys, but this was the movement for artists to unite and be cultural, social, and political revolutionaries. We haven't seen that, right? So referring to Fluxus, a term he coined, he referred to it as kind of the neo-Dadaism or renewed Dadaism, where there was more of that anti-art sentiment expressed. A couple quotes I have of his, he said, George McCunas, he said, Fluxus would fight the traditional artificialities of art. I mean, is art artificial? It's produced by human beings. I don't think we're artificial. Okay, so that was one of his quotes. Fluxus would fight the traditional artificialities of art. He also said that anti-art is life, it's nature, it's true reality. It is one and all. And his death, unfortunately, in 1978, actually really defined the closure of this movement. I don't know how far artists were pushed to be social revolutionaries, but it didn't take on as a main movement. There are some influences in the academics and people who continue on this Fluxus idea. I've seen it performed in Seattle a lot. This kind of thing was performed all the time in Seattle in different ways, but it didn't last long. This movement he wanted to establish, but I do think some of the philosophies remain, unfortunately. But there are Fluxus ideas that happened after his death in 1978. So a couple examples is the event score, where you have brief performances that were pretty much, as far as program is concerned, as far as score is concerned, they were just performers typically following condensed instructions. A motive for this kind of idea was to elevate the banal and raising awareness, raising mindfulness of the mundane. That was one philosophy generating out of the Fluxus movement. That there was this motive to frustrate the art of the cultured or the high art, or what was considered even academic or market-driven. There was actually, from Fluxus, this kind of do-it-yourself mentality. Doing the art instantaneously creates the work of art, rather than something that had been practiced or designed or prepared weeks, days, or months, or even years in advance. Now, I think Troy would appreciate this. If any of this makes sense, I hope these notes make sense. But I think Troy would appreciate this. So one idea that kind of generated out of the Fluxus movement was the shock value. The use of shock and shocking the viewer was more important in these performances. According to the Korean-American artist Namjoon Paik, shock helped make the viewer question their reasoning. He said it awakened the viewer, and that people coming to his concerts or seeing his objects needed to be transported to another state of consciousness. So that was kind of the philosophy there too. That we really want to shock. I just realized this polar opposite dichotomy happening here. On the one hand, they wanted to elevate real life and the mundane with all its mistakes and flaws, and then on the other hand, you have them also saying that they needed to wake up the audience as well. Maybe I just see it that being a gross dichotomy, but there you go. That was the Fluxus movement, the Fluxus and happening movements. The one of the primary goals they had was they attempted to close the gap between art and everyday life. So art kind of assimilated with real life, with the mundane. They tried to make the mundane unpredictable. And I don't know about you guys, but when I go to a museum, or when I go to a movie, or when I read a book, I kind of want to be transported out of the mundane. Why should we elevate the mundane? That's just those are my thoughts. So let's take a break, go into chat, and then I have a few more things on different compositional approaches. So the happening and the Fluxus were more artistic, a multidisciplinary artistic movement, a couple of artistic movements there. So yeah, and I think okay, before I get into chat, in terms of deconstruction, with these movements, and also with something like aleatoric music or stochastic music, what in terms of deconstruction, what about the past in music had been affected or changed? Well, what had been affected or changed? Performance. The first thing I came up with was performance. It was not a matter of achievement or high standard. I think happens with these kinds of events, mediocre performances and mediocre composing and preparing for the event. Mediocre performances is merited as art, and I just don't agree with that at all. Maybe I'm a music teacher telling my students to practice. I don't know. So that's the first thing, performance and mediocrity. The standard of achievement is gone. The second thing is this elevation of everyday life and the elevation of the banal and the mundane. When I see a piece of art, or when I intend to see a piece of art, read a piece of art, watch a movie, I want to be inspired. I want to be struck with awe and wonder. I don't need the mundane. I have the mundane. You have the mundane. So this elevation of the mundane is really, it's a philosophy I don't think is necessary. And in fact, I think it would be kind of dangerous in the practicing of becoming an artist and producing art. The second or third thing I should say is that there is with these movements and with these approaches, there's no fixed direction. There's no narrative. There's in fact, I would actually say that there's a conscious and a proactive stance against narrative and flow and form. And lastly, the rejection of what was traditionally seen as art and these anti-art sentiments expressed by Dadaism, and also this being a kind of a new form of Dadaism. Well, so we'll take a break there. Those notes made a little more sense when I was writing them. So very chewy topic. More to come soon. But let's take a look at the chat. Why not? I mean, yeah, you can talk to the prof. I won't be jealous. It's kind of like going to someone's house for a party and then not saying hello to the host. Just kidding. Professor Geek asks me, you mentioned modes in which more authority is left to the composer, and others where more is left to the performer. How much ability does the conductor have to alter a piece in the end? I was thinking of this piece, a very famous piece, and for the life of me, I can't remember what this piece is called, but it did involve a conductor with these indeterminate methods, these chance type methods. Logan might know because it's a very famous piece. And I can't think of it what it is. For a lot of these performances, a lot of these might not necessarily have a conductor. Might have a composer who gives people a set of instructions on what to do, what to leave out, if they want to leave things out. And so, I think this would apply also if a conductor is in the mix. And I must have been in some performances like that where there is a conductor involved, but it's been so long that I can't really remember. But when the composer relinquishes control to the performer, I would say the same can be said of relinquishing control to the conductor and the performers adhering to the conductor or not. They don't have to adhere to the conductor in a mode like this. So very much you've got all these different outcomes, which I actually think is quite fun. It is quite fun to see a performance like that and to even compose a performance like that. But in terms of authority, in cases like this, the composer really doesn't have a say. In terms of kind of a holistic piece. So you might have moments the composer designed, or fragments, or gestures, or musical ideas, and use of parameters. Maybe the composer gives you only 3 notes to work with, and the group has to they have to be really intentional and really creative with 3 notes. I remember doing that as a composition exercise where I had to write a piece of composition that had to be good quality, but only 3 notes were given me, or you can decide the 3 notes or something like that. So yeah, there's a relinquishing of control in the mix. And I think it's fun, but I also have run into some very lazy performances that are saying, well, that was just part of the process. I was like, no, you could have done better. Because what I get nervous about is a process like this could render. I know this kind of sounds a little weird, but it could render the performer or the composer incompetent, like a little bit lazy. Like, well, I don't have to do as much. And that was only from my experience, and I made a conscious effort to be very intentional with every second. But some performances I saw ran a little too long and a little too dry because of these parameters. Sound engraver. I see Boulet's structures as the farthest thing from totalitarianism for quite a few reasons. Cool. I was being cheeky last week. I think, I mean, total control, but it's also predetermined too. Every parameter is also predetermined. Where's the creativity? Where's the humanness to express? Now, I'm not saying his structures isn't expressive, but I'm fine with a piece like that for maybe 7 or 8 minutes tops. Not I don't think it's as long as 45 minutes. I can't remember. I remember structures being quite long. Thank you, Wolf10. Good to see you. Good to see you. Daniel Craig says, how was it dependent on the audience, though? Oh, for Fluxus? So, for instance, what would be a good example? Okay. I don't think this is an example of Fluxus. In fact, this is a happening event that I went to, and it was, oh my goodness. Oh, the pretentiousness of this event. I, as a student who was making a stipend of $700 a month, paying $525 on living expenses and travel, commuting expenses, what have you, I could not afford a $20 concert, okay? But my professor said, this is worth going. It's a black tie event, but it's not black tie. You don't have to wear black tie dress if you don't want to. But it was a happening movement. It was a happening in this beautiful concert hall. And it was interesting why I paid $20 for something that had the philosophy of art not making money. I don't know. They called it black tie. So I was expected to pay $20 for this, but I remember sitting in this nice concert, and it was a good portion of us. It was about, I would say probably 80 of us, maybe 100 of us in the audience, and these performers started just chucking these huge rolls of brown construction paper, and we're just tossing just these, just meters, yards. All these, I don't know how many rolls and how long those rolls were, but they were gigantic rolls of brown construction paper. And we were supposed to be feeling immersive, let's volleyball this brown paper in this really nice, chic, very nice concert hall. I think it was part of an art museum as well. It was a very nice place. And that's a happening. That's where the audience is involved. So the sound you experience will be totally different and totally experienced at a totally different time from the person, a few rows down, maybe sitting in the back. Maybe the person didn't get, he or she wasn't close enough to get a roll of, a giant roll of construction paper. And so your sound experience is different from that experience. Now, to be honest, I remember the event. I don't remember how it sounded around my ears and people laughing and stuff like that. It was fun, but it's not art. I think that's something you could do for a 10-year-old birthday party. And just invite all these kids in this concert and just throw these giant rolls of construction paper at them. They would have a ball. But that's an example of happening where the audience is immersed. I would say also, I remember seeing Pauline Oliveros when she was in Seattle, and we were in the Seattle Town Hall, and she told us just to go all out or not at all with mouth sounds. And so so I'm not so much of a social experimentalist now, but I was a little mischievous. So you'd have these people, these adults, like people in their 50s and their 60s. It was kind of strange. It was kind of that free form kind of meditative idea of composition, and that audience was partakers of the performance. So all these people, older than me, maybe younger than me, they're making kind of like these, syllabic mouth sounds, and like one guy was kind of beating the bench like a 2-year-old or something like that, and making kind of just really absurd stuff. So I was like, I need to spice things up just a little bit. And so I'd taken a deep breath, and in this town hall, this giant town hall, I just let out the most blood curdling scream. I don't do that kind of stuff anymore. But that's an example of where the audience is involved. It's not up to the performer or to the composer. And some of that stuff is good in terms of, practicing freestyle and practicing shock value like I did in Seattle Town Hall. But it has a function, it has a place in history. But you guys can call me a traditionalist, if that's the word to use. Yeah. So Daniel Craig, you said I don't understand what method the audience would participate. Those are examples. Maybe there are musicians in the audience that they're not performers that night, but maybe they interpret a graphic score, hung, one corner of a venue room, and they'll interpret it, whether it's like a percussive sound on their body or a stamp of the feet or vocalizing something or taking something out of a closet and making sounds out of that. So that's kind of that immersive experience. That's awesome. Number one, there's the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. Number two, therefore, there is a God. I hadn't heard of that. That's good. Peter Kreeft, I think. Is that how you pronounce it? His name? Big Al Presents says, Beethoven tells you what it's like to be Beethoven tells you what it's like to be Beethoven. Mozart tells you what it's like to be human. I don't know. There's some human elements in Beethoven. Bach tells you what it's like to be the universe. You can't go wrong with Bach, that is for sure. Daniel Craig says, sound engraver. This is going to be the stupidest example, but I had a friend who made an amazing pizza one time. She prided herself on never using a recipe or repeating herself. I'm trying to think how that could apply to some of these composition approaches. Was that her first time making pizza? I'm not saying the outcome of these things aren't excellent, but you have a tendency of being lazy as a performer and as a composer. Yeah, exactly. Well, it was a good time, that one, anyway. Yeah. Do you remember the flavor? Do you remember the experience? Professor Geek says, I want to hear about the experience with happening music you mentioned. That was it. Giant rolls of brown construction paper. And if you got the roll, you would try to fling it, real far and real wide. So the whole concert hall was construction paper. It was fun. But if you could do that for like a 7-year-old birthday party, is it art? To be honest, I feel like this is just turning into anti-intellectualism. I don't know why we can't learn from these things instead of insulting them for what they are not. I don't think I'm being anti-intellectual. I like being intellectual. But I do think that some people take it too far. I learned all this stuff, and a lot of that kind of went into how I compose things today. But I think we take things too seriously as well, and there is just a very hostile sentiment toward people who just want to create art to help people and serve people and love on people. I'm not anti-intellectualist. And can we stop with the anti in front of every word? Stop it. That's enough. I'm calling it right now. Just say not. Let's see how we can actually construct your sentence. To be honest, I feel like this is just turning into something that is not intellectual. Now, that's probably a longer sentence, but we're slapping anti against everything. And I don't think I'm anti these. I like a lot of this stuff, but I don't. There is a piousness with some of these artists of the movements that I suggested, where like you have a moral obligation as an artist. No, you don't tell me what to do with my art, and that definitely existed. So I recommend, Logan, that you go to Seattle. I promise you will feel right at home. No professor really got my humor. Paladin demo. I must have missed something. I thought it was Vietnam. It's the first war with the soundtrack. Oh, darn it. These soundtrack references that I'm always confused. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So we have there is a push for artists to be social revolutionaries, and I'm not going to be one of those. Oh, not at all, Logan. Not at all. I don't think so. You're saying I think a lot of her criticism is turning into this is bad because it didn't do what Beethoven did. I don't think so at all, man. I don't think so. But do you think extended technique? Now you're a pianist. I'm not a pianist. I can't speak for anyone playing the piano. But I was talking about extended technique versus traditional technique. Beethoven is way more demanding on my violin, my aptitude for violin playing than anything I would ever do as far as experimental technique. And I love experimental technique. I'm not pushing that away. In fact, I've incorporated a lot of that. I'm doing a lot of things with the experimental technique and sound synthesis and SuperCollider and stuff like that, and I'm having a ball. So don't be narrow-minded like that. I think you're thinking I think this, and I would like to correct you so I can clear my name and say I've learned from the best Beethoven. I've learned from John Cage. I've learned from Pauline Oliveros. I've learned from Jonathan Harvey and Barry Truax. I've learned from all these great people. But do not think that there's no piousness and moral superiority from a lot of these sentiments, because a lot of people are trying to make artists these social revolutionaries. And that I would be anti something. What does that mean? Oh, okay. So Professor Geek says, Sound Engraver, you're tapping into that we can do it better because we're younger mentality. I see throughout art of that time, and it's recurring since then. You're right. Yeah, I mean, I had because young people are so impressionable. I mean, I'm young-ish, but I was very impressionable as a student, and I loved my education. I loved my education. And I will never dismiss my education as being a waste of time or any of that. And I still love learning. And I learned from my professors as well, all of them, both in Seattle and also in Milwaukee. But yeah, there is a mindset that is grossly impressionable when you're in your early 20s. And yeah. Oh, you continued. It goes beyond stretching and exploring into deconstruction and taking and rebelling for the sake of rebelling. I agree too. Now, actually, I'm going to get back into my other notes. There are other forms of composition and composition style and approaches that didn't really go into deconstruction. That is more of an expansion of that. And some of these I really, really, really do like. So let's see. Let's talk about them. I like them. So let's get into minimalism. Not your minimalism style living that is so trendy. Is it still trendy these days? No, I'm talking about minimalism, kind of getting out of the 1960s, 70s, and definitely into the 80s. Really started taking on and established in the New York scene with American composers, using as minimal musical material as possible. So I'm going to say this, contrast to Webern's pointillistic style with use of like dense moments and silence, minimalism was really conveyed through repetition. So with Webern, kind of as contrast, Webern used things sparsely in his pointillistic style. But I'm talking about minimal material that is stretched over time through repetition. Effects included a constant harmony that just really didn't change, the drone, a little change in orchestration. Terry Riley's in C is probably a really good go-to. In fact, I'll put that in there. Terry Riley's in C. And what was that? That was 1968. It spans over, I think, 40 minutes in length, and it's just this. I think it's usually 18 instruments, but I'm not sure. I think the instrumentation actually can vary, but it's using C major, the diatonic tones in C major, and just introducing new gestures over the span of time. And the change is more or less gradual over 40 minutes in length. And like with this piece, these minimalistic pieces, don't tend to have a break in silence. So you just have a stream going for a length of time. Other notable composers are Lamont Young, he's out of Fluxus, Steve Reich, and Philip Glass. Notable composer outside the US who took a pretty unique turn on this idea was the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt. I just shared something, just beautiful collection of his music on Twitter. And he was more into what was called mystic minimalism, inspired by the European Renaissance, Gregorian chant, kind of like that. And he really embraced beautiful tones and tonality, but with very limited or minimal material. Music, where are my notes? So the music is repetitive, but explores consonants and quite beautiful tonality. I'm just gonna put a couple video links of his music. I was actually just turning into just for writing notes, and it's really good music to work to. So this one is what is it called? Spiegel im Spiegel, which is 1978. And here is a collection about an hours in length of different pieces that he worked on. Some notable pieces for minimalism is Steve Reich, Come Out, a little, I believe, based on a political event, and Come Out explores phase shifting. So you can have two of the same, an example is having two of the same tracks, the sound samples stacked against each other, but moving at different speeds. And so you hear kind of this gradual phasing and shifting over time. His piano piece, Piano Phase, in 1967 is pretty good. It takes a lot of control and timing and dexterity for the pianist to do this. Excellent acoustic piece. In fact, I will go ahead and share that link as well. I had a lot of fun listening to it. Oops. Let's see if that works. I hope that link works. We'll see. All right, so the styles, the characteristics of minimal music, often it's repetitive, constant reiteration over a long period of time. And a lot of these pieces go between 20 and 50 minutes. For the American composers, but also people like Arvo Pärt, this is a kind of going back to the tonal or to the diatonic. Though in most pieces I have heard, there's no functional harmony. It's often stagnant. It's just kind of a series of tones, even if they do have a diatonic flavor to them. There's a gradual there's a gradual transition to a new idea, but it's very gradual. And usually this idea is similar to what had come before or similar to what was in the beginning. So you've got this long overarching if I said that word right, long overarching trajectory. It's quite linear. And the material may consist of as few as one or two ideas or musical parameters. And with the start of serialism, at least with the seminal pieces, silence is seldom used. Now, this introduces us to more post-minimalistic approaches in the 1980s. Now, post-minimalism has similar traits. A couple differences. you might hear textures or tones or modes that are, composers are influenced by world music or even popular music. There's an implementation of electronic technique like additive and subtractive synthesis. And it focuses less on that linear trajectory of a trajectory of events slowly, gradually going through the course of time. And I was definitely exposed to this kind of tonal repetition in the Northwest. This was very much a West Coast flavor, but this was a New York thing happening in the New York scene. So I'm sure there are cities in the United States that have this kind of tonal, repetitive, modal flavor. This kind of music can also be found in short films. Philip Glass was also an influential figure in this way. And a couple more. My notes are getting shorter, guys. Thanks for hanging out. So for getting into the 1980s, we have another thing happening called new complexity. I think Brian Ferneyhough is the one to go to. I will go ahead and write his name, Ferneyhough. I believe he taught in Stony Brook because I think my professor, Joël Durand, I think he studied under Ferneyhough for a time. I mean, I think he's retired now. He might be in his 80s now. I'm not sure. But Ferneyhough really established this idea where you have instrumental technique that requires a very specific and very complex notation. So things like macrotonality or gestures that can't be instructed with the traditional score. In fact, I actually have a few scores with me that I'll show you what I worked on, what I mean by these. Hopefully you guys can see them. Complex rhythms that include ratio or mathematical relationships, overtones or use of multiphonics from the winds and the brass, where, depending on the breath and the speed of breath, maybe from a saxophonist, for instance, multiphonics are those tones generated out of a certain force, a certain way of breathing. It's not just one pitch, but a kind of a series of pitch. And often these scores are very difficult to interpret. It really does take practice and study to work through a score. And Ferneyhough's is no joke. It's no exception. George Crumb, I think he's a little, you can approach his music a little bit more as a musician. So before I get into spectral music, which is also pretty interesting, let's see if you guys can see this. I didn't even think about showing you my scores. My mom actually mailed these some months back, and this is the kind of music that I composed. This first one is Caillou for solo bassoon, December of 2011, so almost 10 years ago. This was for Pascal Gallois. He's a French bassoonist, very good. And he did a lot of the he worked on extended technique for bassoon. So I want to see if you can see that. I don't know. Ugh. So here are my program notes. Here's the notation key. So you can see I have a little bit not so this way. Okay, not so traditional style. So I have, I think, 3 pages of program notes. So for instance. Yeah. By the way, I haven't read any of these notes since showing. So a little bit of that there. And let's see. I don't think you can see the words. Let's see. The bottom one says, flap and play all notes randomly in the duration given. Small note heads indicate ghost-like muddled qualities. Let's see if you can see that one. That one, yeah. There we go. So I can't, this is the wrong direction. So hopefully you saw a little bit of that. So that was my solo bassoon program notes. And here's the first page, very tiny. I hope I gave him a bigger page. Let's see. So this is my first page. And this is the stuff I did for acoustic music. I wasn't doing electronic music at the time, so I tried to branch out for some solo stuff, some acoustic stuff. And it's good to have these as a reference. I don't, because I this is 10 years ago. I'm trying to stand still. There you go. So you have these really wide, kind of sweeping gestures here, a lot of rapid, tiny motion here, and a lot of repetitive notes, but change of color there. So that's my bassoon piece, Caillou. I'm sure the University of Washington has a recording. So actually, here's the thing. I liked the result of Caillou because Pascal Gawat was just a phenomenal composer. Here's some other notation that I did for solo violin. Oh man. Well, I'll show you one page, one program there for solo stuff. And here's the score. It looks very impressive. Very, very impressive, right? So there it is. Hopefully you can hear me. So what's happening is actually, I was supposed to do, the top line is, I think, my left hand. Yeah. And then the bottom line is my right hand. Looks impressive enough, but the result was awful. And Huck Hodge, when I showed him, and then I showed him recording, he's like, this is awful. Like, he pulls out his drawer and he just starts running his hands through his drawer, all these items, and just clatter, clatter, clatter. That's what your music sounds like. So it doesn't matter the result. I mean, it doesn't matter the score. It actually does matter the result. Yeah, I think I have a couple others, but one for piano and trumpet. I didn't look at it. Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah, this is a good one. So kind of the so piano is the trumpet is just doing kind of these ghost tones or nail on the stop. It looks like I have a lot of word instructions, and then the piano, the nails are tap the nail. I say tap with nails on front of the soundboard. So something like this. Oh, I can't see. So I have all these like random gestures here to indicate the general motion of that. All these were written in 2011. And for records of those, you'd have to consult with the school library of Seattle, Washington. So that was my graduation year. So I did a lot of different composing. But yeah, that's a very small, not Brian Fernie Howe example of things that just can't really be properly conveyed with traditional techniques. So you have to kind of add your own. All right. And lastly, and by the way, I say lastly, but there are so many other branches of different music. I might get into the history of computer music probably another time, though. There's a lot of this I enjoy. I enjoy reviewing, but it is pretty chewy. So I'll take a bit of a break with the history of computer music. But let's talk about spectral music of the 1980s. And just an overview. Spectral music was music that was written based on the sound spectra of an instrument or an ensemble, the timbre, and that overtone series, that range of an instrument. So the natural sound of a clarinet, for instance, was the primary material. So something extracted from the sound spectrum. So from a frequency that's not simply a sine tone or a tone, but a fundamental frequency with the overtones. And what overtones, or what part of the harmonic series, is very distinct to the clarinet and to the clarinet sound. And so you have sound and you have the harmonic series pulled apart to form a musical narrative. And the most notable composers were the French composers Gérard Griset and Tristan Murail. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. But just in case I don't pronounce it correctly. I will just go ahead and say and just type out their names as well. Pretty interesting people. Oops, that's not how you say it. That's the first one. These two are pretty much the pioneers of spectral music. She's done, but more others followed. Actually, more others were writing the same. I think that's how you spell his name. Can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, those were the pioneers of the composers. But we had also American composers like Joshua Feinberg. He had his hand in this kind of style. John Chowning, which he was a Stanford professor and composer. I actually had the chance of meeting him. Really nice guy. And he implemented FM synthesis and that digital implementation of radio technology. Good stuff. So components of spectral music are things like the harmonic series, microtones, acoustics, the nature of the sound traveling and reflecting off the acoustic spaces, focus on timbre or the sound color of the instrument or the orchestra. And there was an attempt to not assimilate, but there was an attempt to simulate the environment, whatever the case may be. So you're trying to establish the environment of a certain room, or maybe an arboretum, for instance, and how trees take in sound, absorb sound, reflect sound, and all of that. And definitely introducing things like frequency modulation, amplitude modulation, and phase modulation. So just as kind of a recap for all of this, what has been affected or supposedly deconstructed? Well, with aleatoric music and fluxus music and the happening movement, I would say standard of achievement. I'm not saying that composers were inept. They were totally prestigious and they were part of music history. And the same is true for performers, but you have to, as a performer, you have to be very intentional for it to be a good performance, or a performance that's not so haphazard. Because I've been in a lot of haphazard performances. I contributed to some of them by not being intentional with my instrument or with my voice. And then when you are intentional, there's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. So that standard of achievement, mediocrity is at play, and because there's no performance etiquette or performance technique where that's not present, it's okay. Well, mistakes are fine. It's okay to be a little lazy with your technique. And again, that's my experience. Logan's experience might be totally different, but that was my experience, and I have 8 years of experience. So there is that. Now. There's also that heightened appreciation of the mundane or the real life. Now, this is why I do not, again, this is a preference, it's not fact, but this is why I don't read contemporary fiction. I want to read something fantastical. Let's read some Asimov, dang it, because I want to break away from the mundane. And so the philosophy that you needed to assimilate real life with art, sure, that could be a great experience. That's fine and it has its place in history, but I actually don't care to do it all the time, and I don't think it needs to be like a pushed standard, to bring to the social table. If people want that, because there are venues for that kind of stuff, then fine, pay your $20. But the thing is, anyone can do it. Anyone can have this kind of happening event. It definitely does help if you have capable performers, but this kind of obliteration of the line between performer and an audience, where I like that there is a different result every time, but a push that it has to be. And maybe it's just my exposure in Seattle. Like this was done all the time in Seattle. I was maybe I'm just like, oh, come on, guys, let's go back to let's go to jazz. Let's go to a jazz concert tonight. So if I broke away in my thinking and didn't finish my point, I apologize. But anyway, yeah, that kind of heightened appreciation for the kind of living your life. I'm like, I have a heightened appreciation every time I read scripture and every time I read the Bible and live my day. That's good enough for me. I want to be struck with awe and wonder. And I can do that as an audience member. I don't have to do that as a performer. I'd like to be inspired as someone in the audience as well. The what also has been pulled apart is also expectation. Expectation that is built in from education and experience. What people go to a concert to, they're expecting some level of achievement in performances. And so the unpredictable mattered more than the form or the narrative, and the process matters more than the result. I'm not saying there's not a place for that, but I tend to, just as a musician, as a composer, I tend to want the process being important and the result being important. I don't think there should be like a dismissal of the result. So anything can happen. And as I had said before, in my experience, unpredictability tends to become aurally and musically predictable over time, because we need a point of reference. We need some point of reference. There's nothing fixed that we can refer to. And I think that's just part of being human. We're oriented to have this. We have localization, how we hear things, how we are seeing things and sensing things. We have an inherent built-in system where there are points to refer to. And I think, at least to some extent, it should be that same way with art and music. Now, I will actually say that what is torn down is artistic freedom with this kind of movement, because if there is a push to become like a revolutionary with your art, first of all, if that's your choice, that's your choice, and I'm not knocking it. But don't let anyone push you to do that. I think art, with this, at least by the founder of Fluxus, what was his name? George McCunis. He was pushing this idea of revolutionizing things with your art. And what happens is art actually is being pushed to be confined to a social and political form of expression, and nothing outside that, nothing beyond that. So I actually think that's being pulled down as well. Your very autonomy as an artist, that people, expecting you to have this moral obligation to do something with your art. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. If you want to do it, but don't feel morally obligated to doing it if that's just not your thing. It's not my thing. I just want to make people happy with my art. Or not. I'm not saying my art isn't deep, but yeah. So anyway, I think that's everything. So in terms of the actual idea of deconstruction, that's not really felt with minimalism or getting into spectral music, or what was the other one? New complexity. That was actually more expanded on. Those, composition and technique was expanded on with these approaches. Spectral composers were pioneers in finding a way. They were finding ways to assimilate music with computer science and physics, and all this ultimately leads to computer music. That was also happening in the 50s and into the 60s and into the 80s. But that's a whole other topic. So those are all my notes, all my notes, and then also these notes, my score. Yeah. That was my composition undergrad stuff. All right. Okay, good. I was thinking, oh my goodness, 11 o'clock. It's been 2 hours, but I started 9:30, so we've got some time. Okay, let's see what you guys are doing. What are you guys talking about? I'm going to approach this this chat carefully because I'm way behind. I'm like 50 minutes behind. So I will try to go through chat as much as I can. Troy Pacelli says, mediocrity is lauded. Everyone gets a participation award. I mean, yeah, I try not to use those kinds of terms. I mean, I get what you're saying, Troy. But it's more, yeah. I mean, I could be a traditionalist. I have no problem with that. Listen, I've spent 23 years on my instrument. I wanna wow people, you know, and it's okay. It's okay. I have made people, man, I've made people so grateful. And I'm not tooting my horn when I say that. Like I've been shocked how a person, like a man in his 60s or something, comes up to me, or in his 70s comes up to me after playing Danny Boy, for instance, and he would say, that was my alma mater, and thank you for doing that for me. You know, bringing that light, that joy to people. It's not commercialized. It's not bad to, you know, if someone wants to give me a $20 bill for my performing for Danny Boy. I think that was him. I think he gave me a $20 bill for playing Danny Boy so sweetly. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. But it does take practice. I think people have a fear of being industrious and working and getting good at something. Well, I only know Marvel Comics through 4th age. Yeah. Oh, hey, Owen. Nice to see you. AG Boomer says, what work of art did you experience recently that inspired you? Man, what work of art has recently inspired me? Oh, I'm sure I could think of something. I mean, actually, I listened to the Estonian composer, Arvo Pärt. I don't know if I wrote his name. I've been listening to his music today, and it's quite nice. I hate bringing up the example again, but I've been writing this pretty. I'm finally finishing the buildup of a scene. Like I'm building up to a very huge action sequence in my story, and it's been a slow buildup just due to things I've had to do and stuff. But I've been listening to Solarfield's music, and him, and here's another guy, Stefan Torto. I've mentioned him before. Greek composer, or Grecian. I think Greek, is that how you would say it? Greek or Grecian, same thing. That kind of percussive, that driving percussive that uses instruments and software I would love to use. Don't have the skill for it yet, but being inspired to write like those artists. Oh, yes. Thank you, Logan. Yes, thanks. There were the conduction and sound painting movements. You might be thinking of John Zorn's Cobra. Yeah, I thought it was Cobra with a K, but I think you're right. I think that was right. So Prof, he's referring to a music piece that involves performers with a conductor. Big Al presents, is there a work that you personally enjoy but is not considered to have merit by others? I feel like that's a question you would ask. I'm just kidding. Oh, man. I'd have to think on that, Big Al, because I'm generally a little picky when it comes to what music I listen to and how it's rendered. So I'd have to think about that. If I do, I'll let you know for sure. I mean, I've used this example before. Well, okay. Okay, no, I can't think of something. I like this genre. I'll write it down too. This is a electronic music genre. I haven't listened to it in a while. Uplifting trance. It's not really underground trance as it used to be. It's actually as the name implies, it's really uplifting. It's got this really good, really kinetic, kind of feel good, kind of dopamine effect. A lot of that music that I listen to doesn't have the post production quality, and even maybe not even the composition quality. But I do enjoy it. I do enjoy it, and some of those tracks that I've heard aren't good compositionally and post production wise. Um, but it's just something I just like. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Logan says, I feel like evaluating the mundane in artistic contexts has greatly changed how I approach life and my personal relationships. That's good. It makes me treat life as art by doing the opposite. Yeah, I think that's good too. It has its role. That is for sure. It has its role in music history and also performances. Uh, my concern though is while it has its place, I I would be concerned just for me as an artist. You could do whatever you want, but I don't want the tearing down of excellence and exceptionalism. There, the way a human being and a human spirit grows in whatever area of their life is through practice and achieving something. It doesn't have to be fame. It doesn't have to be something superficial. It could be just learning something about a time period in history you want and be eloquent and succinct about your thoughts on that point in history. It could be something as simple as just wanting to know something or wanting to learn something, wanting to learn a craft for your own personal enrichment, for your own enjoyment. But I think there I mean, I kind of see this kind of apathy even with my own students in a way. Hopefully, none of my students are watching me now. Well, those who by chance are watching me, I don't even think they know my channel name. Those are the good students because not because they're watching me, but because I actually do have students who try really hard and want to learn and want to grow on their instrument, at least the craft of, you know, learn their craft and at least practice learning and practice practicing and all that. So that I have some of those students, but this general apathy for not wanting to you know grow emotionally, intellectually, and artistically. I think people begin to decay. There's this there could be a sense of apathy coming on if people are not careful. Um, and so I don't want. I like that you said that, Logan, because I think that's important for art to do that. But I have a concern that I don't want. I don't want it bleeding into everything else where someone it's kind of hard to explain, and I'm going to get into this idea maybe a couple weeks down the road. But that form of art is fine, and those performances are fine, and they should be around just to check out and have fun because actually they are kind of fun to go to as well. They can be intellectual or not. It's fine. But not at the expense of something else, not at the expense of making art and exceptionalism subservient. That's what I'm nervous about. The organic, yes, assimilate life and art. That's fine. But I don't want mediocrity celebrated so much so that exceptionalism is taken down. And I think just as a teacher, just what I've seen with things around, it's we have to have that industrious spirit again to make fine art as well. And that's actually that was a common sentiment in the 20th century, from Dadaism all the way getting up to in the 1970s, where there was this anti-art mentality, like that. The disdain for high art. Why is there disdain for high art? If you don't want to do if you don't want to do high art, don't do it. But why have the disdain for it? That's what I don't understand. That's what I never understand. That's what I never understood as a student. And so I like that it's done that for your life, Logan. That's great. Um, I think just the events that I went to there was a disdain for uh, art that conveyed exceptionalism and aptitude and technical dexterity and different things like that. Daniel Craig says, I wish I could interject like we were speaking person to person. I have observations from other disciplines that would relate to performer, conductor, audience dynamic. What do you do, Daniel? Are you a musician? Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood that. I have observations from other disciplines that would relate to the performer, conductor, audience dynamic. Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten to. I do have topics to talk about. Let me get a feel of live streaming still. As far as having an actual face-to-face exchange on a live stream, because I'm still feeling it out. And I'd like to know kind of like how people talked or saying things verbally to me as an exchange as well, because that really would be interesting to have people on board. But I really would have to feel it, like with Craig, for instance. Not you, Daniel Craig, but Craig, the teacher. I knew him as a person because I see him every Thursday in the school, so I know how he talks. He's a very effective teacher, so I was comfortable with inviting him. But yeah, if you have some observations now, that would be great. Well, I wouldn't disagree with that there, Prof. Yeah, you throw out the craft, you throw out the art. Period. I think. I will say this. If you had a 3-year-old, produce something without any practice or any experience, or even just the cerebral aptitude, and it looked very much like whatever a 3-year-old would produce, like a normal 3-year-old, not some protege or some gifted 3-year-old. And people called it art, and it was objectively not art. I think I would have a problem with that. I think art has its place. When people talk about we got to save the arts, like we're saving STEM, we're saving science. Science is important. Art is just as important. Well, yeah, but consider if you're comparing art to science, you're comparing the practice of art to the practices of science. Getting better at the science, getting better at the theory, getting better at the experimentation, so you can get that better result. That's that scientific method. So it's improved upon and it's worked through. If you treat art as important as science, you have to adhere to the value of practice and experimentation and the standard of excellence. Because let me tell you, I want surgeons to be top notch when they perform. It's all surgery. No, you guys got to be at the top of your game. And so if you do actually place art with that same level of importance as science, I would say place the same value of exceptionalism and practice as well. Okay, I think I'm thinking of I'm seeing yeah. Yeah. Was that the example of audience participation? That's funny. I think DRY had it too. Audience participation at its peak. Yeah, that's a different format for sure. Daniel Craig says, I saw a band called the Liars Handshake once. They were very proud. They had no percussion, and the audience was the drummer. Cool. Was it good? Was it cool? Oh, I can't post that. I can't post your next one, Daniel Craig. Even with that word censored, I still can't do it. Oh, but you're telling me the experience. So, okay, I see. Yeah, you can. I mean, it can be like that. It could be like, oh, whatever, just let it be. And that's fine in a social gathering and all of that, but yeah. yeah. Let's So, Sound, you are anti. I'm so anti. Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing this. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's my overactive imagination, but I'm seeing this trend of placing anti in front of every word. I'm definitely not anti-intellectual. I love my intellectualism. I love getting smarter. I love thinking things deeply. The book I'm reading is very intellectual. Trip Chili says, what some people call intellectualism is really just lazy thinking, mental. Yeah. Well, not everything is art either. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like not everything is art, and that's okay. It's okay. Can we just say that? Not everything is art, and it's okay. Now, some egos may be crushed with that statement, but that's okay. Logan says a lot of stuff like a lot of this stuff does get kind of cringy when performed by classical musicians. I just don't see why we have to trash all these historical figures because of bad performances. I'm not trashing these figures. If by saying what their sentiments have been that are, strong, they had their sentiments, and those sentiments are strong, and I labeled those sentiments. That's not trashing them. They would want to be known for those things anyway. But I'm not trashing. I think people read headlines too much, like, so and so bashed this person, so and so trashed this person. That's too many headlines, man. I don't trash these people. If I was really trashing these people, the best way I can trash someone is not bringing them up. And I brought these people up, and I admire their influence. And again, they have their place in history. But it's not trashing them. But you probably are correct if you think that I would make a terrible professor. Oh man, my social experimentation as a 20-year-old would probably shoot through the roof if I had tenure. But by the way, that's a dig on classical musicians. Maybe you don't want to go to Seattle, because a lot of classical musicians and classically trained musicians do this kind of music, like music of Xenakis and all of that. And they're very good. They're very good. I think that group is still around. What's it called? Seattle Modern Orchestra. Very competent musicians. By the way, notice the words I use. I don't say, what did you say? I didn't actually even use bad performances. I said there's a tendency of getting lazy and mediocre. So no, it's not trashing the actual historical event just because of bad performances. But why can't I call out the danger? You're a music student. You think critically. Think critically. Don't take everything as face value, like everything is as it needs to be. I always look at the bigger picture, or I go one step further. I go that second mile. That's what my channel is about, by the way. So So please stay with your questions and comments, but know that this is where it's going. I don't mind challenging. I don't mind challenging the status quo. That's what these people did. So why can't I challenge the status quo? Sound engraver, well-written extended techniques can be just as demanding as Beethoven. Scherznauen? I haven't looked at that. And Lachenmann is great. Lachenmann's a great guy. Right, very timbrally complex music that requires a strong ear and good technique. Lachenmann, yes, in terms of performance and dexterity, but no, not as a string player. Not as a string player. Are you an upper string player? Do you play violin or viola? No. Now, it is demanding, but not, well, okay. I'm going to say this. Maybe Lachenmann, but I'll say this. The performances I see in Seattle, my 7-year-old students can do. I'm sorry. It's the truth. It's the truth. I can look at a Lachenmann score and do it. Or George Crumb. Yeah, I mean, it requires some dexterity, but the demanding physical, it is so athletic. You have to be a freaking athlete to play Brahms or Bach. Now, I'm not saying it's better in that respect, but I would also say for musicians, for at least upper string musicians, I can't speak for any other instrument. I can't speak for piano. You do piano. No. Bach slaughters me every time. And I think I could, I'll look at Lachenmann. But I'm not a student anymore, so I don't have access to his scores. But as far as like artificial harmonics and window wiping bow and pressure and a lot of pressure, of all that stuff, that's easy compared to what Bach asks me to do. So no, I have to see the other composer. I haven't seen this person. But just in my experience as an upper string player, absolutely not. I could definitely do extended technique much easier than the traditional stuff. Yes, I've got more artists on board, I think. Let's see. Gennaro Sciano. I think you're getting at the fact that some artists want to speak for the piece rather than let the piece speak for itself. Bro. Welcome. I don't know who you are. That's top notch right there. Thank you. If it sounds like random gobbledygook, it doesn't matter what you were thinking about when you made it. And well, part of it, I'll say this, part of it, again, it's like the mentality of the Fluxus composers. Again, this is something they did. I'm not digging at them. I'm not taking shots at them, but they valued the process more than the result. Why can't you have both? I think Troy posts a meme from time to time. Why can't it be both? It should be both. But I would say the result matters more. It's like you can have an award-winning recipe for the best culinary artist in the world, of the best, I don't know, throw me a French cuisine. You can have the best of the best on the page. But if it's not executed, no one cares about the meal. Well, maybe they'll care about the meal. Maybe they'll say, yeah, you tried. You did a good job. It just wasn't the meal that I thought you would produce with such a recipe. It's kind of that. I mean, I think the process is important, but why does the result have to be subservient to the process? It's almost as if the process justifies the art. The process does not justify the art. Again, I've said this before. Like, I'm sure I have. Oh, what was it? Oh, this one. My violin piece. I end up not doing the score. So I have the score. I'll read you the program. Now, I wrote this 10 years ago, so lay off. All right. It's a paragraph. I'm not going to read a lot. Trecciare is an experimental work for solo violin that introduces raw concepts for contemporary performance interpretation. I primarily worked with intimate sounds that naturally surface between the body of the instrument and the fingers. Two main ideas portrayed in the overall trajectory are tracing and friction. The two may interchange, depending on the pressure against the varnish and the fingerboard. Any percussive result is later illustrated with the use of the bow. I employed 2 staves in the first half of the piece, each for the left hand and right hand. The rendering of the score proved very difficult because of the experimentation. I am debating whether this piece should be set to score in the future or improvised under composition guidelines. And the score is presently used as a reference for the work's overall structure and development. So let's show you how beautiful this is. Look at that. Look at this. I did this 10 years ago. I don't think I can do that anymore. Those days are gone. But look how artistic that looks. The result was crap. Okay. It was just crap. I decided to, I'm sorry for using that word. I know that's a strong word on my channel, but that's how I feel. My own experience. So I remember being so distraught. You know, I was like, this doesn't work. But I have a portfolio to send to Milwaukee. You know, I have this portfolio to send for these, you know, a professor in Milwaukee. And so Hakaj went back to me. He said, well, why don't you just do improvisation? I was like, improvisation. I did a score, dang it. He's like, the score is awful. I mean, the sound is awful. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And so without even thinking about it, I thought about what I wanted. Well, I did think about what I wanted for the structure. And then I remember my friend was behind me on stage, and I said, listen, I'm gonna go on stage. No one was there. It was just a recording. I'm gonna go on stage. I'm just gonna freestyle based on what my structure was about. And I remember it being one of the most dynamically compelling pieces I had ever done on freestyle and improv. And all of it was extended technique. Bach is harder. But yeah, it's like the process doesn't matter when the result is terrible. I lived through that. I was chastised by a professor. I was like, but the score's pretty and the program is great. He's like, the sound is awful. And that's what mattered. That ultimately is what mattered. $11:30. Oh man, I'm so behind, chat. I gotta roll, guys. Come on. Stop commenting. I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully a lot of this made sense. Daniel Craig says, minimalism requires a very precise application of tone and melody and rhythm. It has to be precise and pleasant, or else it's a painful slog. There are some very good minimalist pieces, and minimalism, excuse me, does take a lot of dexterity and technique for the performer. And I think in some ways it makes it more accessible. Gennaro says, an explanation can enrich the piece, but if the piece needs the explanation to work without evoking emotional response from the listener, not for me. I think for a lot of people. I used to want to be about the generative process and the stochastic stuff and all that good stuff. But I think for most people, but I can't speak for anyone besides myself, so you guys would have to put that in the chat. I would say it really is about what you produce. The process can get you there. That's the thing. The process can get you there, but sometimes it's a failed process. And you kind of have to, you know, pick yourself back up, you know, dust the kneecaps and keep striding forward. Thanks, Nanette. I'm listening while pulling out carpet, so I'm not going to be commenting much. Well, thank you for letting me know. Oh, yeah, because last week I felt so abandoned because I didn't see Nanette. and Troy and Al and the prof. They just all, it seemed like they all left. Sound Engraver says, I think my problem is I know some broy, I actually don't know that, type people that think avant-garde stuff is superior and are very annoying about it. Yeah, I think there's a balance. I think there's a balance because, I don't want to disregard what has come before with regards to music history, like avant-garde, like neoclassicism, like the breaking away of late romantic music. I think all of that is very important, and all of that can be implemented in some form or another with your composition and your style. So I think it's kind of like, did I give this analogy on my stream? I feel like I've said it before. Picture all these genres and these composers and these influences as if you're walking into a candy shop. I just like a little bit of dark chocolate, and I like some gummy candy. Maybe not jelly beans today. So it's kind of like that. And you mentioned Lochinmon. He's one of my favorites in that crowd, and George Crumb too. I think this is who you have qualms. Wait, I think this is who you have qualms, but in my experience, these people usually grow out of it sophomore year. Yeah, I mean, every school year is different. Every school experience is different. I was never a freshman, by the way. Fun fact about me, I was never a freshman. I went to junior high that had 8th and 9th grade. So I started high school in 10th grade. And I was never a freshman in college because I went to community college. Oh, you still went on. I'm sorry. However, I also know a lot of fellow students who learn this stuff superficially and then hate on entire art movements, because they think they know enough about it. This is what makes me uncomfortable. Well, first of all, I'll never hate on anything, but I do want to call out some things that I've known over my own experience. So, for instance, whether it's these composers or not, I don't know. But in my experience with the Fluxus movement or the Happening movement, there was actually disdain for the line between performer and audience. Like there's this established hierarchy of prejudice. And there's no, I mean, the audience members know that they're the audience. They go to the concert. Like, people are fine with being a viewer or a listener. So it's not so much the obliteration of the line I have a problem with. I think there's a place for that in history, and those events are nice to go to when you go to them. Very immersive, very interactive, and I think there is room for that. It's the disdain that I had experienced in this. It was a very proactive sentiment of we can't have this line between audience and performers. And I'm like, it's okay, guys, it's okay. So that kind of cultural push with the movement, I feel like, no, I'm fine. I write science fiction, but I'm fine with being a reader. I'm a performer, but I'm fine with being a listener. You can have these different roles. But I get that. I mean, well, I would say, Logan, keep Seattle on your radar. You'll find a lot of opinions in Seattle. If they are very forward with their opinions as they were 9 or 10 years ago, you'll have to learn to be uncomfortable because there are some set opinions as well. Professor Geek says, "Wow, those program notes are so much more involved than bass tablature." Man, that was 10 years ago when I was doing it. I had Sibelius 6. That was my software, and I really did love Sibelius 6. But now these notation softwares, you have to subscribe and you have to update every year, and it's really expensive. So I will be totally honest, guys. I have not done a score in ages. I mean, the only scoring I do are just transcriptions for my students on things, but yeah. I'm primarily electronic music and SuperCollider. SuperCollider is my scoring now, and Logic Pro. What was this, Al? Ugh, had to reboot, so you'll have to start over. All the way over? I don't know. that was a long lecture. Next couple weeks will be a lot lighter, I think. Let's see. We're coming on 2 hours. Let me see if I can catch up. Oh my goodness, guys. I do apologize. Owen Lister says, I'm starting to despise the idea of deconstruction of any art form lately. It comes across as spiteful and egotistical, and that's the problem. Now, on the one hand, I agree with Logan that it can be, and I experienced this and understood this as an undergrad. It can be a way of expanding on something or breaking apart something to study it, but we have, at least you've guys seen it with popular culture, this almost sadistic idea of it, like let's dismantle everything you love, and some of that was expressed with Dadaism, the anti-art, Duchamp, I think it was, had a sentiment with that, where it was the tearing down of the love of high art. Now, I think there's room for experimentation, and even a huge movement of experimentation. And I would say it's on the other side too. I mean, egotism is human, actually. So being egotistical as a I grew up as a classical musician. I mean, there's some egotistical ideas and flavors over on that side of the spectrum. So it's all over. It's not just this part of the art scene. But the treatment, I think what you're saying is like, let's take something you love and just totally wreck it. I would say wreck it to learn it and then rebuild it. I don't know. Oh, Paladin demo, Foundation. I read, was it the Bicentennial Man? Oh, long time ago. I can't remember. Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I've read the first 4 installments. Well, I think the Foundation trilogy is 7 books, and the main events start in book 3. I can't remember. I remember not reading the first 2 books, which acted, I think, as prequels of some kind. But I read 4 of those books. I enjoyed especially the 4th one. Hashtag the mule lives. Or was he called the Mule or just Mule? I think it was the Mule. All right. Professor Geek says, agreed. I apply Jerome Berner's definition of mythology to art. It is at once an external reality. Let me say this right. It is at once an external reality and the resonance of the internal vicissitudes of man. Oh. Yeah, I think so. I think that's very good. Me? I still have a little bit of a movie to finish up for tomorrow. Notorious tomorrow. It's good. I like it. I completed the first hour of it. It's good. I'm trying to catch up. Ah, dude. Okay. Yeah. So have you ever listened to music by Samuel Kim? He makes a lot of epic covers of film and TV shows. Yeah. His stuff is really good. I do have a bit of a critique. He did was it the Force theme? It was the Force theme for Star Wars. And he says epic covers, and it's not the same harmony. I actually do think, as cool as it is, and it's got a dopamine effect. No, there's no question. It's a pleasing sounding, real good epic electronic rendition the Force theme, but it's very generic harmony that sounds good, but it is thrown around a lot. And I actually I referred to this, I think, in my stream on the music of Star Wars and Disney Star Wars, because if Disney does not understand where it's going musically, and Lucasfilm doesn't understand where it's going musically, it's going to sound like that. It's going to sound like Samuel Kim. I'm not saying his stuff is bad, but it's distinctly not Star Wars. It could be any new game coming out. You know, it could sound fantastical with dragons and stuff. It's Star Wars is so distinct in nature, musically speaking. So it's fun stuff. I like the sound of it, but it's kind of and it's well done. It's well produced, but it's missing the mark as far as that traditional John Williams flavor. What is this? Let's see. I think there's a distinction to be made between mundane and what? I'm not getting it. Oh, you mean mundane and everyday life? Yeah. I think I have heard the word mundane used for the normal or everyday life. So like you know, if you go read the Harry Potter series, that's an escape from the mundane, from your own world, and also from Harry Potter's world, where he was pretty much shackled with abusive relatives. You know, he escapes to Hogwarts, to a world he doesn't know. He's escaped the mundane, even in his own fictitious world. Oh yeah. Oh, let's see. I think you're making a point. Mundane is in subject about the everyday, and mundane as in you aren't very good at what you do. Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, no, it's not. Oh, I got to be careful with this, and I want to be careful because I understand Logan's concern with what I have to say. It's not. I don't want to conflate mundane with mediocre. Mediocrity can be the cause of performances like this. But you can also do beautiful art, well done, that has to do with everyday life. It's hard. It's easy to conflate these different meanings. So mundane meaning the everyday, and then assimilating that everyday with your artistic experiences, which as Logan has pointed out, I think has function and purpose, and good purpose. I just hope people approach these events and these performances with respect in the preparation of these events. I think it should have give art enough respect to have prepare it, prepare for it, practice it, look at it, study it, and then perform it. So hopefully I hope I'm not conflating some of these words. I'll probably go back to this and see if I sounded like it made sense. Daniel Craig says, I'm a software engineer by trade, but my observation was based on around partner dancing and DJing. Cool. Sound Groove, you want me to tell my nieces and nephews that their drawings aren't? I don't think I can do that. Do it. It'll be a service. You could still be nice and still be truthful. Well, it's like it's arts and crafts, The book I'm reading is very intellectual. Scoundrels, right? Not quite. I mean, I'm reading Scoundrels too, but yeah, it's funny. Let's see. What am I reading? I'm reading I think I said it before, The Closing of the American Mind by Professor Alan Bloom. It's good stuff. So far, the library hasn't called to ask for it back, so I'm just going to continue reading until I'm done. Yeah, I did some Lachenmann in my day. Sound Engraver holds up my use of what the why not both meme, yes, but usually in less intellectual discussions. Blonde versus ginger, sweet versus salty. Oh man. Oh yeah. I try to not be so I try to choose my words carefully. Yeah. Now you guys all making fun of me. Which famous composer or artistic movement? It's the Fluxus movement. Has claimed that the process is more important than the result. Boulez kind of thought that from 1954, which he did. You're right, but that was about it. No, that's not about it. It's the Fluxus movement because the part of an offshoot. What was happening was also instantaneous performance or performance art that was more or less improvised. Actually, I have no problem with freestyle improvisation, by the way. But in terms of famous composers, I'm actually talking about the performances I experienced. So no famous composers were a part of that. But I mean, well, I'll look for you because I'd be hard pressed to not find a composer who was a man like John Cage, man. John Cage, like he with his Chinese number method, I Ching. That's a process, and he didn't like the result would be what it was based on what panels, what cards, or whatever he used would be the case. So definitely Cage, and that's fine. That's fine. And Cage had with his piano music, definitely had you would have to have the technical prowess to do something like that. I'm talking more about what it can, again, tendency. Can I make myself clear? Tendency, the propensity to be lazy. And I'm only saying it from experience. Go to Seattle, share the same experience. And actually go ahead if there, I mean, it's, of course with the pandemic, but this is the, that's for you, Logan. This is the venue that I often went. I've also performed in that venue. That was one of the venues that did that kind of stuff. I can't remember what was happening. Sorry about last week. Prof was talking to me to cheer me up because my mom. I can't. Oh, you mean you leaving my stream or something? Guys, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You guys can leave whenever you want. It's almost midnight. I'll wrap it up in about 15 minutes. Let me just get caught up with chat. Oh, yes, Wolf 10. Yes. I was thinking about even sharing it on the Professor Geek Facebook page group. That was pretty insightful. Yeah, his videos are so great. I love it. And I like that it's once a week, it's kind of like a treat. Like, oh yeah, it's my Sunday dinner video to listen to. Oh, wait. Oh, I've got some intellectual reasons for I don't dislike Thrawn. You guys are putting words in my mouth. First, you accused me of being anti-intellectual. Sorry, Logan. Nothing against you. I know what you mean. And then you're like, you don't like Thrawn. I don't dislike Thrawn. I don't get the cult behind Thrawn. Now that's for another stream. If you guys are ready and waiting, I will talk to you about my opinions on Thrawn. Just a couple things, just a couple things. But I'm actually almost cerebrally bankrupt after this live stream. So you'll have to wait. Oh, dude, am I almost done? Yes, go to Seattle. I actually think you would actually be in a pretty good group of people. I loved my professors there. I learned a lot from my professors, and they were open for discussion. I think, I mean, if they were like 10 years ago, they are a little bit hard. I would ask very tough questions in front of, it would be me, an undergrad, in front of these doctorates and these professors. And I challenged an idea, and they hit me back. They had no, I mean, not abrasively. They were kind, but they were ready to hit back. It was like, no, we gotta tell you what it is. But I would present some challenging ideas, only because I was confused and I was curious. And so, and I don't mean to say like a whole room full of doctorates and professors, but it was about 4 professors, and it was about, 6 or 7 doctorates and a couple of masters, and I was the only undergrad for a lot of those classes because the others just didn't care about the new music. And I love new music. I mean, I really do value my education, but that's the thing, I'm honest about it. I want to challenge it as the figures in the 1950s and 60s and as early as Schoenberg and before Schoenberg, as they were challenging music. Why can't I? Why can't I challenge them? Why can't I challenge their mindset? I think I'm within every reason to challenge them as they've challenged what came before them. So I'm just modeling after them. Finished pulling up the carpet off the stairs, showered and ate, and back to listening. Thank you. What is this, Daniel? What? Let's see. Is it like bacon is good, but putting bacon in cheesecake does not suddenly make the cheesecake better? So if I was Fan Man would probably eat that cheesecake whole. He would probably say that cheesecake was the most glorious thing ever made. But again, like Thrawn, I don't get the appeal of bacon either. It's just bacon. Give me a couple strips and I'll be fine. It's like, oh my goodness, bacon. It's like, oh my goodness, Thrawn. It's like the appeal is just unparalleled. I can't even drink my water, but I'm probably going to choke on it. Professor Geek says, oh, so we're now a cult. I see how it is. Just because we don't drink the... Yeah. I laughed at anti, and then I saw onion flavored Kool-Aid. Yeah. Now again, I don't like onions like Fan Man likes bacon. I'm not onion crazy. I'm not anti-Thrawn either. Stop putting words in my mouth. Cult of Pan. Yeah, man. Oh man, that's funny. We gotta wrap it up soon. Oh, I'm caught up with chat. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That we're in the clear there. That's what I'm saying. Bacon is good, but it doesn't increase the value of everything you put on. Exactly. All right. Let's wrap it up. We'll have to talk about Thrawn another time. Yeah. Yeah, actually, well, if you haven't been, Logan, if you haven't been to the West Coast, I strongly I strongly recommend any student when they're pursuing a master's or a doctorate to go far away from the home. You just learn things differently. I would have friends tell me, "Oh, don't move to that city or don't move to that state. That's conservative. That's too liberal." And it's like that's not going to be a factor for me. I make friends with everyone. I think West Coast would be a good change of scene. You're Eastman. I can't remember where Eastman is. Is that New York? I can't remember off the top of my head where Eastman is. But I think, yeah, even though if you've been on the East Coast or nearby the East Coast, West Coast is very different. Or not, I don't know. I haven't been there in 10 years. Rochester, New York. Yeah. By the way, yeah, if you're kind of based in New York, you'll have, I think you will have more or less the same mind frame of school of thinking over in Seattle, because a lot of some adjunct and some composers in residence and some professors themselves, they've been in the New York scene. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely Fluxus and figures like Philip Glass and all of that, definitely a part of that New York culture. So very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. So, yeah, exactly. I agree, Owen Lesser. Let's try plugging some things. Let's do Tuesdays. Notorious tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to finish that tonight. I love it so far. I completed the first hour. Really enjoyed it. Notorious on the Professor Geek channel, 10 p.m. for some live commentary, and I'll be a part of that. That'll be fun. Thursday, I gotta catch up on my reading. So much homework. Scoundrels, Thursday night, also on the Professor Geek channel, 10 p.m. Eastern. Always tune in for Fan Man's Second Cup Cafe. I always like it when I see his icon that he's on live. I'm like, yeah, it's Second Cup Cafe. And maybe something Friday night for him. So be on the lookout for that. And what's happening with Rewatch? Because I don't know the schedule. Is it on Troy's channel? Are you doing it this time, Troy? And what is it? Because I can't remember. And then, of course, live commentary, Monday nights. Oh, I forgot to, yeah. Okay, so Professor has said yes on a number of occasions, so I think we're good to go for next Monday on my channel, on my stream. Probably 9:30, maybe 10, but maybe 9:30. Probably closer to 10 now that I think about it. So he might talk about more deconstruction from the comics perspective and what deconstruction has done to iconic characters. Superman, of course, Batman, probably Wonder Woman. I'm sure she's been prodded at for different treatments. And maybe if there's also deconstruction in some literary examples, Prof, that would be fun. And we might not, but I hope we can draw parallels to what had been in the music scene. Hopefully this was a huge overview. It was an overview. I feel like I haven't scratched the surface of a lot of this music history. But in any case, yes, confirmed. Yeah, and I'll post a snapshot of this. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, why not? I'm not gonna do it. I was really wanting to. So confirmed, you guys. You all saw it. So timestamp 2 hours and 23 minutes. So we'll talk about deconstruction and other art forms in that respect. So I think it's an important topic. Troy Pacelli says, we're planning on it being on Netter's network. Good. And the film will be at the Lake House Thank you for clarifying. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's it. I'm ready to watch a movie. So thank you always for watching and listening. Always be on the lookout for some sound experimentation every Thursday, some live commentary every Monday nights. And until I see you next, keep producing the art you love, and I will catch you later. Thanks again.